This is the Storyworks Roundtable, where we have conversations about craft. Because becoming a successful author begins with writing a great story. Hello and welcome to this week's Storyworks Roundtable. Today, Robert, Kathryn, and I are answering a reader question. But before we do that, a quick reminder that Robert is stepping back from the roundtable soon. So if you are interested in having a seat at the roundtable or want to recommend somebody to us, please let me know. Email info@storyworkspodcast.com. So we had a question come in from Pamela. She says, love the podcast. Could you talk about developing comedic moments in the story? I love P.G. Wodehouse, but I really don't know any other good comedic authors. I really appreciate your insights. Well, thank you, Pamela. We love hearing from you. Comedic writing is not my niche. And I was thinking about this. I was like, oh boy, can I do this question justice? So I have a couple of thoughts, but first, do you read much comedy, or do you find comedy in the stories you're reading? Do you find comedic moments?
Yeah, I don't read, so I wouldn't search for comedy first, but I do love it when it's really well done, especially like banter and dialogue, which is not quite the same as Jeeves, for example. But so I think there are different styles, different voices in comedy. But if Pamela's talking about comedic moments, then definitely I will enjoy books for that, and then go back to the author because I like that, but I haven't necessarily found them through that. So I think it is an art to putting it in words, because you don't have the oral and visual cues that are so important in comedy. You know, you watch a comedian deliver a line, they've refined the way they deliver that, the raise of the eyebrow, the look sideways, the pause. And all of those have to be orchestrated in words, which is really hard. So I think that's why it's an acquired taste. You have to first resonate with that author's voice. So yeah, comedy varies huge. I mean, you've got everything from satire all the way through to, quirky sort of punny sort of Dumb and Dumber type stuff,
Right. And I want to throw out our Molly McCloy episodes, having you mentioned comedy, Robert. So everybody go back and find the Molly McCloy episode. She talks about oral storytelling. She is a Moth Grand Slam winner 4 times over. So she knows oral storytelling. And she's also a creative nonfiction writer and essayist. And her writing, even the written essays without the oral piece, the oral delivery, I find contain a ton of humor. And they're about a difficult subject matter. And yet, if you look at her descriptions, her wording, the way she sets up tension in a scene, because comedic tension is just the flip side of dramatic tension. It's getting us anticipating what's about to happen eagerly, whether we're anticipating a laugh or a cringe or, a big wet kiss or a sigh, like whatever we're anticipating. That's what tension is about. So I'm glad you mentioned comedians, Robert.
I think for me, comedy, I mean, I don't know much about it either, but like when it hits for me, it's that subverting the expectation, right? So you have the tension leading up to the moment, and then it gets subverted and changed to something unexpected. And that's where I will laugh out loud. And then my husband is like, oh, what was so funny? And then you can't just read him the one line, because it was a whole, set of circumstances that led up to this switch that you weren't expecting to make you have that moment of laughter. But I also agree with Robert that it's so voice dependent. Like if you have a voice that can pull that off in the book, right? Not like your personal voice, but like the book has to have a certain tonal and quality in order to be comedic in like value. I'm thinking like color values, like in terms of like tone and texture, like it's comedic. Or if you're talking about just like having comedic moments, then maybe you have a character with that voice, or you have a situation where the voice lightens and turns into a comedic moment, maybe out of something dark.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, voice and tone, that's definitely a big piece of it, but you might be writing a story that doesn't have a comedic tone overall, but you have some scenes or some situations where something happens that, as you were saying, Kathryn, is surprising, something turns around. And you mentioned you can't tell your husband the one line, is that you had to be there thing. Mm-hmm. And I think so much of it is about bringing the reader into the situation that builds up to that comedy. When I was thinking about this earlier, there's one book that stands out in my memory as making me laugh out loud. And I was working at a university, so on my lunch break, I would sit outside on campus and read this book on my lap while I was eating. And I could not stop laughing. Like day after day, I would be laughing out loud alone outside with all these people around me. And it was Road Fever by Tim Cahill. So it's nonfiction, but I was thinking, why was this that funny? And it's because I feel like I'm a part of these characters' movement through time and space, and like I'm experiencing the situations they're getting into. And some of it is definitely dialogue, and some of it is bizarre circumstances. And, those life moments where you kind of scratch your head and go, wow, I can't believe that just happened. But yeah, so bringing the reader into it and having that build, I think, is a part of what creates I think Pamela called it punch moment in her email, creates that effect for the reader.
Yeah, so thinking about what you're saying about Tim Cahill, I think some of this is situational as well. So, you're planting a particular character inside a particular situation, and just the mere fact of that can help bubble comedic moments to the surface. So you've got, the supercilious butler, or you've got like Spencer in the detective books, who happens to be extremely well educated. He's a student of literature. And so there are times where he's up against these thuggish criminals and they say something and he corrects their grammar. What? and it completely goes over the criminal's head, and it's hilarious. So some of that comes from the fact that the character can deliver it in a particular way, in a deadpan way. So okay, is my character deadpan or are they slapstick? So thinking about the comedy styles. I did some study of I never wrote comedy, but there's a book called Comedy Writing Step by Step, which I read and loved, and it's probably still got somewhere in the cupboard. And then when I was studying neurolinguistics, we were looking at what is the structure of comedy and how does that work. And that's fascinating because there are so many things in there that play to, and you both mentioned it, you're taking along a series of expectations. So we would call that pacing. So as if you're walking side by side with someone, you're talking about something. And then if you're doing this, if you literally met a friend down the street and you're walking along, and oh, hi, let's catch up, and you're chatting and you're finding out where you're both at. And then if you've got sufficient rapport, you can actually turn or stop or change something and they will follow you because it's instinctive. And this is the very structure of almost every dramatic moment, but it's certainly the structure of comedy because we're kind of going, oh yeah, oh yeah, oh yeah, oh what? And so it's that last moment. And it happens, and that's what Pam was talking about. And that comedic punch, I think, is delivered with what I would call a reframe of circumstance or a reframe of the situation. So often what a comedian will do is they'll take something from a different context and transplant it into what we're just experiencing. So, it might be that if it's an autobiography, you're experiencing this person's day and all of a sudden something happens that's totally out of left field, but can still be understood by the reader. So, they're about to, they're building up to go out on a date or something like that. And then all of a sudden, they've found themselves having to clear up something their pet did that was very messy. And they haven't realized they've stepped out the door and their hand stinks of poo or something, so you've got these sort of things where you've got, okay, what if I was cleaning something up and then my hand stank? What would be a situation in which that would be hilarious? And that's what comedians do. That's how they formulate jokes in the first place. They witness something that happens in real life and then think, where would that be unexpectedly funny? Mm-hmm. So I think, it's definitely an art, but it's all about reframing.
Yeah.
Right.
Twists and reveals.
Yeah.
Twists and reveals. Exactly.
Yes, you're right on. And as you were describing this, Robert, I was thinking back to Molly McCloy's essay, Fragile Donkey, which we linked to in the show notes, so you can actually read it online because it was published. I forget which literary journal, Blue Mesa Review. So you can go back to our show notes and read this essay. But, Molly's descriptions bring us into the moment with the characters. So there's that being part of the scenario. And like in part of the essay, she and her little brother, their kids, it's like the 70s, late 70s, I think, and they need to get some money. So they're at a friend's house and there's a stack of checks on the mom's desk and they're all filled out and signed. And so they pocket the checks and they ride their like huffy bikes to the drive-through window at the bank. And it's described as just this fun caper, And then there's the exchange with the teller, and the teller calls the manager over, and you see Molly as a girl trying to get out of this situation and the kids taking off. And it's so funny because you're watching this moment unfold and you're surprised by what's happening. You're surprised by what comes next, but it's not like somebody jumping out of a closet and shouting boo. You're part of the scenario, so you get to anticipate, right? And then it's the writer's job to land the punch moment or the moment of surprise and delight, so that all that anticipation is fulfilled, right? Not with what we expect, but with what surprises us.
Yes, correct. I think that's exactly spot on. You can't have comedy without the build-up. And I was thinking about that as you were talking about it. Okay, so what happens then? There's a particular show, it's an English show I watched, where just the banter and exchange between the panelists is hilarious. But the reason why it's hilarious is they will often call back to something that's been discussed already. So there's been build-up, even though it sounds like it's where do they get those hilarious quips from? Well, it's not hilarious out of context. If someone just walked up to you in the street and said, well, you wouldn't wear that at a funeral, would you? You go, what? But, if they've been talking about, a fancy dress party and how this, person went along wearing a 1970s bathing suit, all of a sudden it's transplanted. It's in a different situation. So I think there has to be build up. There has to be a set of expectations that get suddenly twisted. And there's some sense of familiarity about the build-up as well. So whatever is funny has to relate to whatever we've just experienced for that comedic punch.
Are you ready to take your storycraft to the next level? Storyworks Fiction Online School has courses available right now, from micro courses on character traits to master-level workshops on plot and building characters. There are also live workshops with your instructor in the classroom with you every week, guiding your progress and workshopping your manuscripts along the way. All students enrolled in StoryWorks Fiction, whether active in a class or not, can take advantage of the monthly free live Q&A calls with Alida. Check out storyworksfiction.com today and take your storycraft to the next level.
And even things, I mean, I'm thinking about this as a limerick that I've always remembered. And so you've got standard setups like limericks, where the reader or the listener knows what to expect. So there was a young man from Dundee who was stung on the arm by a bee, of course.
Bee.
So, but it doesn't go like that. It says there was a young man from Dundee who was stung on the arm by a wasp. When asked, does it hurt? He said, no, it doesn't. I'm so glad it wasn't a hornet. You go, what? You have to, in order to digest that, you've got to go back and think what went wrong there that delivered something that was amusing. It was because it went off expectations. And so I think that the build-up is really important, and then how you reframe that twist, how you deliver something that's unexpected, that may or may not be funny when you first write it or even say it. You know, there are times when I was running presentation skills programs, and you'd get quite slick at delivering certain pieces of content because you know what would raise a laugh. And then I tried again the next time and I'd do something slightly differently and it wasn't at all funny. And you go, why is that? You know, and every comedian experiences that something falls flat. And it's just something about maybe there was a little thing that wasn't handled in the setup, or maybe some slight emotional part of the delivery was missing. So it's not easy, Pamela. I think you have to study how, you know, the masters do it. But the basics are definitely build up normalized expectations and then reverse them, twist them, reframe them.
Yes. Yeah. And an example of that, a quick one from Molly's essay, which I'll use again because you can go read it. At the beginning of the essay, the kids are sneaking out and they have to get out without waking up their parents. And she's talking about tiptoeing past the teddy bear. And you're brought into this vivid moment of children tiptoeing, right? And then she tells us that they're prepared for their adventure. And one of them, the oldest, has a switchblade and the middle one has nunchucks. And she's got, I forget what in her pocket. And you go, what? Like that doesn't align with the teddy bear. That's not what I was expecting. And you might not say ha for that example, right? For that moment, but you certainly go on high alert, like, oh, where is this going? Because now it's not going where I expected. And that's what comedy does for us. And I'll just say again, the essay is about a difficult subject, but it is laced with moments of comedy because of the way Molly McCloy writes it. So I'm not saying that, you know, what happened to Molly is funny. Please don't anybody think that.
No.
That is the genius, though, I think, of very well-crafted storytelling, is that you can have really gobsmacking moments and still laced with observational humor. And that's a real skill. It's admirable.
It is. Yes. Have either of you ever written funny stories or crafted funny moments in your work?
That's a difficult question.
Have you tackled
it? Because it's only funny in the eye of the beholder. So do I know whether it's funny? I've got no idea.
Yeah. I was just going to say that if you're deliberately trying to write something that is funny, not just something that's maybe unintentionally you wrote something funny where you're like, haha, look what I did, right?
Yeah.
You're probably going to need to have an audience and get a lot of feedback before you know for sure that it works well. And sorry, I stepped away. So if you guys already said this, I apologize. But
no,
it's like you can't just trust your own instincts on this. And I think, you know, comedians do this as well.
Totally.
Like, you know, you have to fine tune that joke. So if you're writing something specifically like this has to be, you know, the whole point is that my whole audience is going to hit this point and laugh. Like you're going to have to read it to a lot of people and see, you know, where they start glazing over. Where did you lose them? You know, where do you have to pick the pacing up? Where can you drop stuff to kind of like, you know, make it really tight because I think it needs to be really tight, right? But the only time I've ever been funny is probably to myself because I thought it was hilarious. But I've never deliberately tried to craft funny stuff.
Yeah, I saw David Sedaris live once, and he told us he reads his unpublished work when he goes on tour. So when he does a tour, he's not reading what you've already seen in a book. He's workshopping what's going to come out next so he can get the audience reactions and fine tune it along the way. And I think, keeping it tight because it's only words on a page and you don't have the oral delivery, you need to make certain that your narrative doesn't have anything extraneous that could, distract from that buildup or dilute the funny moment. I have a short story called Wild Animal, and it's on my author website, alidawinternheimer.com. If anyone wants to read it. But when I wrote it, I didn't know it was funny because I was so in the process of crafting this story. And then I read it at like an open mic reading, and I was like having to stop myself cracking up so I could get through the reading. And I don't think anyone in the audience was laughing with me. They were probably just bewildered. But then a friend and I were going to do radio plays. And so I converted it into a script, and we did a table reading of the script. And we were both like rolling. We thought it was hilarious. And a lot of that has to do with the delivery and the timing and such too, of course. But I just think it's interesting that you might write something that's very funny, but not realize it in the moment because you're so in the headspace of crafting all of these other elements that go into it.
Yeah. So, I mean, if you do, then there's a great opportunity there for anybody, not just Pamela, study your own writing. If there was something that made you giggle when you went back and read it, what was that I did? Because that will be in your voice. So you're not trying to emulate anybody else or be in a voice produced by you. So because I think it's as much of an art, I suppose, as, writing good fight scenes or good thriller moments. But in a way, it's a lot more personal because comedy is such a subjective thing. We all know that things that, even a good friend can find hilarious and you just can't stand it. But it doesn't make them suddenly not a good friend. It's interesting how personal comedy can be. I really like biting social satire. I really don't mind people who rip apart current social conventions. And I won't go off on a tangent about it, but it's annoying when comedy gets savaged by politically correct movements, because to me, I like comedy that makes me think about even horrific moments, the whole, too soon, that sort of idea of joking about something that's really been a human horror is a way of processing. It's not the way of processing, but it's a way. And so I think it depends on what sort of style of comedy you really like. There's everything, as I said at the start, there's everything from biting satire through to, slapstick sort of genius. And there probably a writer who's really good at slapstick genius can't write political satire.
Yeah. And I think, for text, for literature, observational humor works really well, and character-driven humor where it's dialogue. Or circumstances or action works really well, because you can't control the delivery that's on the reader. And you can't add visuals to it. Like, you might describe somebody tripping, but whether or not it's funny is down to words on the page and how those translate in the reader's mind. So, that's a totally different ballgame. Yeah. So,
it must be funny. I put a banana peel in there.
Right. Yes. She walked out of the bathroom with her skirt tucked into the pantyhose Well, okay, yeah, that might be right. Like, what makes that funny? It's not just the act of it happening, it's the circumstances around it, it's characters' reactions to it, it's, you know, the person it's happening to, it's her reaction.
Yeah.
It's
Yeah.
so
Nobody
many
noticed until
elements.
she turned around on the stage.
Yeah.
So you've got to take that and say, okay, when would that be
Funny.
embarrassingly funny,
Mm-hmm.
you know, as opposed to just embarrassing, or, you know, so, or even, you know, if you took that particular moment and, you know, she turns around on the stage and to point up at the PowerPoint presentation to show, you know, the importance of power dressing, and she turns around and her skirt's tucked up in her pantyhose, you know, so it's now funnier because of the context even. So it's really, it's definitely an art to try and understand what you're getting at.
It is. And I would definitely go read funny books, you know, Molly McCloy, David Sedaris, PG Wodehouse, Tim Cahill, anyone else you guys can think of. Those are the ones we've mentioned so far. But look at the balance between narrative, action, and dialogue, and see if you can pinpoint the moment that makes you laugh. And what is it? Is it something that's happening, like somebody tripping? Is it something that's being said? Maybe it's a misunderstanding in dialogue that goes up, you know, something goes off the rails and gets ridiculous and comedic. Maybe it's, and then analyze the scene, break it down.
Absolutely.
You know?
Yeah. You have to reverse engineer it, because there will have been build up in there and you don't notice it because all you feel is the sudden aha moment. Which results in a laugh, and you think, oh, how did they do that? Well, they did that 3 paragraphs ago. So, you know, or something like that, you know, so you know, it might be the entire book set up, who knows, but yeah, I agree. Go sort of reverse engineer and study that scene.
Definitely. Thank you for listening to the Storyworks Roundtable. Find all our shows, show notes, and videos at storyworkspodcast.com.